Well, welcome everybody to our online program on addiction and recovery from the Sunshine Coast Health Center up here in Powell River, BC. And we've been talking about this idea of abstinence as the solution to all drug problems, the big picture, as opposed to dealing with an individual person who's struggling with an addiction. And this idea basically has come about in the United States, Canada, and several other countries in the mid-1800s. Before then, people would talk about moderation as the solution, but nowadays it's abstinence. We're not quite sure why it was in the 1850s. Things happened. William White, who wrote a history of addiction treatment in the United States, he claims the reason was these temperance societies discovered that the idea of moderation for drinking really didn't lead to any success, so they changed to abstinence. I don't know how accurate that is, but that's William White's take on it. But something happened that promoted the idea of abstinence as the solution to addiction. And so we've just been talking about this idea of abstinence and how accurate it is, and is there any scientific evidence behind it? Yeah, things like that. Well, one of the things we can look at and learn from, I think, is the drug prevention programs that are done mainly for young people. And as far as I'm aware, just about every drug prevention program operates on the principle of drugs are bad, so don't do them. And if we can take an example of the DARE program, right? Probably the most famous drug prevention program around, certainly done in, I think I read in research, it's given in 80% of American schools. It's given in a lot of Canadian schools as well. But what's particularly interesting about the DARE program is that every independent study ever done on it has shown that it is ineffective, which is quite interesting, regardless of what the DARE people say. All the independent researchers have crunched the numbers and without exception have said this does not work. So this is really quite interesting, right? Here we are spending all these tax dollars presenting a program that the scientists have pretty much proven is ineffective. So then, why are we doing it? So this is the interesting one. Well, you got to think about this. If the young people are not benefiting from it, then who is? Well, it's probably the parents, probably the community, maybe the teachers. They're feeling that they're doing their part, right, to get rid of this drug problem. And even if it's scientifically not valid, it really doesn't seem to matter, because everyone seems to feel better by saying, drugs are bad, so don't do drugs. And this is quite interesting. In other words, they're preaching abstinence even though there's no validity to the programs. And by the way, every single program that has taken as its philosophy, drugs are bad, don't do drugs, has actually been proven ineffective. I'm completely unaware of any program that has any success rate whatsoever with that approach. And so this is kind of interesting. Now, there's a lot of researchers, for example, who have also pointed out that this idea of drugs are bad, don't do drugs, this has really hampered our research into the field. For example, in prevention programs, particularly in England, they're very upset about what they call the abstinence ideology that pervades research. And the abstinence ideology, they say, does not make funds available for them to, for example, ask the young people, well, what are the benefits that you find being intoxicated? So we find in the research that there are very few experiments that have been conducted asking young people, why they like drugs so much, what's so attractive about them. Yes, that's interesting. And a lot of researchers are very upset, not so much now, but a decade ago, that if they said anything other than drugs are bad, don't do drugs, they were very worried that their research funding would be cut. So this idea of abstinence really started affecting how researchers conducted their research. So again, it's this idea of, is this really the best approach, right? Or is there is there a better approach? Are there other ways of looking at solving the addiction problem? At any rate, these are interesting things to think about, in particular this idea that maybe a lot of people talk about abstinence because it makes them feel better, even if, like drug prevention programs, they don't actually work that well. Anyway, that's it for this week, and we'll be back next week with one more example of abstinence. Anyway,